Hello, everybody, and welcome back to This is a Woman podcast. I am your host, Sophia Laurie, and I have a special guest for you guys all today. Her and I met maybe 3 years ago when we were fighting some legislation about gender identity, parents losing their rights on children, so many different things like that. And she is just an absolute rock star on this gender ideology stuff. She has two amazing books, a children's book and a book for teenagers through adults that we're going to talk about today. If you head to This Is a Woman podcast Instagram page, depending when you listen to this, we might still have the giveaway running to win a signed copy of each of those books. But the guest is Pamela Garfield Jaeger, or as known online as the Truthful Therapist. So Pamela is a licensed therapist. She's an LCSW, author and national advocate for children, families, and parental rights. She's known publicly as the Truthful Therapist. Pamela speaks courageously about the cultural and clinical forces harming children today, particularly around gender ideology, identity confusion, and the erosion of faith, truth, and parental authority. With more than 2 decades in the mental health field, including experience as a clinical supervisor, Pamela brings both professional credibility and moral clarity to conversations parents are often afraid to have and are grateful to hear. And so, as we live in a society where you're constantly feeling like, who can I trust anymore? Can we trust teachers? Can we trust doctors? Can we trust therapists? I am so excited for you guys to hear the ins and out of what is happening in the mental health world right now from Pamela. We're going to dive into how you can be well prepared. We're going to dive into the books. There's so much that you guys are going to learn from Pamela. She is just amazing. So, with that, let's just get right into it. Well, hello, Pamela, and welcome to This is a Woman podcast. We are so excited to have you on today.
Hey there. Thank you. Me too. I'm excited.
So, for the listeners, we got to know each other actually through work at the California Capitol and some crazy bills that are being introduced there, and being at the Capitol fighting bills together. And yet, we're still connected through different events across the nation. And Pamela, we were actually together in DC earlier this year.
hmm
And you were telling me about a new book you have out, which we're going to dive into today, too. And so I can't wait to tell all the listeners about this book and everything. But the listeners have heard a little bit about who you are. So before we dive into the books and everything going on today, could you share a little bit about how you became a therapist?
How I became a therapist or how I became the truthful therapist. I guess those are two different stories.
Yes. I want to hear what made you want to become a therapist, and then we'll get into becoming the truthful
Uh,
therapist.
well, I'll just say I was one of those women that wanted to help people. And I found that I had a gift for listening and being patient and working with people with all kinds of issues without being too harsh and being able to help people. And that's just what I gravitated towards when I was young and looking for a career. And when I was looking for jobs, I remember seeing all the jobs that I was interested in, and they all required a master's in social work. I think if I were looking nowadays, it wouldn't be the same because they've gone off the rails, which we'll talk about. But at the time, back in the this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with kids who are in foster care, or, underprivileged families, that sort of thing. Just help people who are struggling with different issues. That I was one of those people.
Yes. No, I love that. And so, like you said, this was back in the 90s. That was what was drawing
hmm
the mental health field. At what point did you start to see a change in therapy, social work, where we started to see it maybe shift more to aligning with some of the ideologies and culture?
I don't know if you know my whole stories. When I was kind of left leaning or just sort of neutral, not really very political. And I had to leave my profession because of a pretty bad physical disability in 2017. And when I came back in 2021, that's when I noticed things were just completely different. It was like I had entered the twilight zone. So I think things had gradually gotten bad even before that, but I wasn't noticing it. But those years between 2017 and 2021 were when things really got crazy. And so I wasn't seeing it come gradually. It came suddenly for me because I wasn't paying attention to what was happening politically. I wasn't paying attention to what was happening culturally. I was honestly in pretty bad physical condition. I was in a lot of pain. So I was spending every day just fighting doctors and trying to deal with my own personal health issues. So when I came back, it was nuts. And that's when I noticed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is then you came back. And I think that's around the same time a lot of people started noticing there's been a big change in culture, on social media. We just started seeing a lot of changes in those years in general.
Mhm.
But you saw these changes and you didn't just stay quiet about them. You've been very outspoken about what is happening. And so is this kind of what led to becoming the truthful therapist?
Exactly, yeah. So when I came back, I had been out of my working for about 4 years, a little more even, and so I was feeling rusty or just, out of the loop, so I was quiet while I was working, but I was watching half the girls identify as trans at this program I was working at. I was watching my colleagues completely affirm it, demonizing parents who had questions about it, seeing very obvious issues being covered up by this gender thing. It's very strange. And then also, this was it was really still during the lockdowns in California. And so there was all the fallout from COVID. We were still masking, and it was a healthcare center. And doing group therapy with teenagers with masks on is not ideal, to say the least. And we knew at that point they didn't help. They weren't helping anything. And I just couldn't believe that nobody was even fighting back or speaking up or saying, well, we need to make some changes here. We were still wiping down all of the surfaces. So here we are, a mental health facility that's supposed to help people with their anxiety and with their OCD. And we have a therapist wiping down surfaces between every session, behaving more like they have OCD than the patients. So, yes, I was observing all of this. And then, of course, they started to mandate the COVID vaccine. And when I had just gone through all of those health issues, I didn't trust it. I had no political motivations behind my decision. I didn't even know much about it. I wasn't a conspiracy theorist, or I just didn't trust it for myself because I had gone through such a bad health odyssey. And so they said I couldn't work there anymore. And that's when I spoke up. I said, you know what? I got nothing to lose, nothing more to lose after being disabled, losing in my career anyway. I felt called to it. I felt like I had to speak up because other people needed to stay in the field. They needed to support themselves. I was still getting some disability payments. So I had a lot less to lose. I wanted to work just to be in society, but I realized this maybe was my calling instead. So that's
Absolutely.
how it
And
went
so,
down.
yeah. And so when you started noticing all these different changes, at first, were you like, okay, I'm not going to say anything. And then with the COVID vaccination and kind of being pushed out, anyways, that's when you were like, all right, like I'm putting it down and I'm going to start speaking.
That is kind of like that. I was planning on speaking up, but I was only there maybe 6 months total. My whole return was about 6 months, and then they pushed me out pretty suddenly. And so I was trying to just establish myself. I was only part-time. I was per diem. So I couldn't even work a normal schedule because I still had a lot of pain. I had nerve pain. So just to understand what was going on, I had basically a bad repetitive stress injury. It was like in my brachial plexus, I'm pointing to near my shoulder, and my nerves were being compressed. And I had to get some surgeries, and I was put on all these medications that didn't actually help me. So I got better enough to be able to function again just to a part time level. However, I couldn't really work a regular schedule. And so I was just trying to establish myself. So I didn't feel comfortable just bulldozing in there and be like, what are you doing? You guys are crazy. I didn't want to say that. So I was saying little things here and there, but I was planning on having more conversations with them. And I was I'd say, getting good stature there too. I was a former supervisor, and a lot of the therapists there had less experience than me, and they were coming to me for support, for advice. And I was giving that to them just because that was the role I was in before. And, they appreciated me for that. But I didn't feel comfortable just saying, you guys are all nuts. What are you doing? Yeah, just yet.
Yes, no, that makes complete sense. And one of the things that you mentioned was when you came back, half of the girls in this program you were involved in were identifying as trans. And I guess for such a long time, it was you trust therapists, you trust doctors, you trust teachers. And then I think over the past few years, parents have been realizing we can't just like send our kids off anywhere and just trust the adults they're with anymore because we don't know what ideology these people are going to be trying to either indoctrinate children with or press on children. And so for you, you're like, no, like I'm a therapist and I'm not bought into all the nonsense. So there are still good situations out there. But when you walked in and you saw half these girls in this program identifying as trans, is this something that therapists can speak out against? Are they free to question current narratives around gender and identity, or are most bought into it?
Well, one, most are bought into it. They don't think a whole lot about it, and they're sort of, I'd say, bamboozled. They're fooled to believe that it's the kind thing to do to affirm these trans identities, and most of them believe that. But there are enough that don't believe in it, but those that don't believe in it are afraid to say so because they watch that cancel culture happen. Lots of people have been made examples of. They cannot speak out. And as you know, in California, there's even these conversion therapy laws. So they consider it conversion therapy if you do exploratory therapy with someone who has a trans identity. And so they're scared. They don't want to speak out. They want to be able to serve their patients. And you can't serve your patients if you get fired or if you lose your license.
And so what, like, parents maybe that have their kids, and I know we're gonna dive more into this about one of your books later, but parents that have kids that are maybe struggling with this gender identity, is it the smartest route to throw them into therapy right now? Or what advice would you give to them there?
Yeah, most likely no. I mean, I would say it depends. Your audience is broad, so it depends. If they're really there are some more serious mental health issues that have when we have safety concerns, then we need to figure out what to do. But the shame of it all is that we really can't trust any of these institutions. We can't trust inpatient hospitals. And these things are needed. We can't just say, we can't have any therapy at all, because there are circumstances where it is needed when there are more serious situations. However, if it's not that serious, and what I mean by not that serious means there is an imminent danger and you're not worried that they're going to really hurt themselves physically, I'd believe that you should not go to therapy, at least not right away. You should try other things first. And I think that's been a problem even before all of this. That's been a frustration of mine as a counselor, that a lot of parents will send their kid to me. They want me to fix their kid when really it should be the parent that should be spending more time with their child. Of course, I was working in a very affluent area in California, and that's sort of the culture there. That's obviously not the culture in every area and not of every family. However, that was a trend that I was seeing, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you said, sometimes it is, have you sat and chatted with your child about anything they're going through before sending them to me? And so luckily I know, like, the moms and grandmas that do listen to this, they are having conversations with their kids. And so to keep doing that. But Pamela, something on your website that really just stood out to me right away when I saw it. It just says therapy without indoctrination. And, if I saw that 10 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, therapy without indoctrination. Like, that's what all therapy should be, right? Like, we shouldn't be putting indoctrination in any of these things. But that's not necessarily the case anymore. Most people do believe therapy has a lot of indoctrination on it. So, what does therapy without indoctrination mean to you? And why did you decide to put that on your website?
Well, the problem is the therapists themselves are very indoctrinated. If you look at any graduate program or any training program for therapists, you'll see it's got a lot of ideology in it. It's not very therapeutic anymore. It has a lot of critical race theory in it. It obviously has a lot of gender ideology in it. They promote social justice. They say that they should be social justice warriors. They're not even shy as using that phrase. They don't even shy away from that. So you don't want to send someone to a therapist that's believing that they should be a social justice warrior on your child. So if you don't want them to start making your little boy feel bad about himself because he's a boy or because of the color of his skin. You don't want someone to believe that they're a victim or that all the source of their problems is not in their own locus of control. And that's what a lot of therapists believe now, that it's all systemic, this or that. It's not just racism, all kinds of systemic things. I can't even catch up with all the new words they're using. I just saw something like, what was the word? It was about saneism. So you have a privilege if you're sane or something. I'm telling you.
Oh,
And this
goodness.
is real. So you really want to use a lot of discretion when you're looking for a therapist. And when I first made that website at the time, culturally, especially in the conservative arena, people were talking a lot about teachers being indoctrinating. They noticed the education system. We were under lockdowns. People were seeing through Zoom school, how bad the schools were, but they were not noticing the mental health. They were not noticing the therapists. The therapists were almost worse than the teachers. I'm not sure they're in a good competition there. And so I wanted people to recognize just like the teachers are so indoctrinated, the therapists are too, and they're pushing this onto your children.
As you're saying this, it has me thinking like we have the stats that show that if you don't affirm a child, if people aren't affirming a child and them thinking they can identify as the opposite sex, most of them, I believe it's like 90% of them now, will come to terms with who they are post puberty and love their body. And if they were male, born as like, recognize that they're born as male, that's beautiful. Or if they're female, vice versa. And yet, I feel like so often I hear if you send your child to therapy and they're a girl that think they're a boy, the therapist is going to affirm them. And it just makes me think, we also see studies that show that suicidal ideation actually increases post trying to
Yes.
medically transition your body. But therapists are affirming this gender identity. Why do you think that's happening when we have stats that show how horrible this is to do your body and then therapists are affirming us?
Well, see, you and I and people who have done their research have seen the real data.
Mhm,
However, most therapists are still being lied to, and they believe their superiors when they say the opposite is true, and they show them other data that's completely false, that if you look at it with even the slightest scrutiny, you'll see it completely falls apart. You'll
mhm.
see very small sample sizes. You'll see self or directed surveys that lead them to say that they're suicidal when they're really not. Like maybe they've had a thought or something like that. But that doesn't mean they're actually suicidal. It doesn't mean that it doesn't actually show the numbers of what happens. There's no control groups in their studies at all. So, for example, we don't have a group of kids or even adults who identify as trans and give them a course of letting them be and figuring it out and maybe doing more exercise or just being in the world off their computers. And then another set of kids who are sent to be affirmed and get all of the drugs and everything else and then check their suicide rates. That's never happened on either end. We actually don't have that data at all. So no one can make that claim, but because they believe in experts, parents are believing in experts, and that's a lot of my message. Don't believe experts because these so-called experts are believing they're experts, and all these experts are just quoting false data.
Mhm.
That's how.
No, absolutely. And then it makes me think, what about students right now that want to go to school for social work to become a therapist? And do
Tough.
they just kind of have to like agree to, even if they're like, we recognize that this is indoctrination, the gender ideology is hurting children, not helping children, all of this. Do they just kind of have to sit there in class and basically say, I agree, I agree, I agree, just to get their degree, to get their master's? I mean, how is that working in the schools right now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not in grad school. I'm older, and when I went through it, it wasn't like that. But I've heard from other people, and for the most part, yes, they do. They have to sit there and take it, otherwise, they won't get through. I know a lot of people are trying to speak up. They're trying to share, but they get pummeled. It's so hard. So I think they have to choose their battles pretty wisely, and it's difficult. And there are a couple programs that are better than others. Like Liberty University has a mental health program, but even they're not perfect. They still believe in some of this woke stuff, not to the same degree. But I think every program deserves to be questioned. At least it used to be where when you were a student, you were allowed to ask your professor questions and not get ostracized for it. But unfortunately, we're not in that culture anymore.
Absolutely. I mean, I know I've heard conversations from students who go to Christian universities, not Liberty University, but other Christian
Mhm.
universities that I've talked to. And I hear the stuff that they're being taught on this topic, and it just makes me think like, man, you are a Christian university. You have the actual ability to say, you know what? We're going to teach you like how this actually negatively affects children. We're going to teach you the truth. And it's sad to think even Christian universities that
Yeah. Yeah.
students taught the opposite. I mean, it makes me really concerned for I'm already concerned where we're at in the mental health world with therapists, but it makes me really concerned for the next 10, 15 years. And it just makes me think it's going to take a while to turn this all around, unfortunately. But I'm glad to hear from you that there are people that are wanting to speak out
Mhm.
or interested in doing so because at the end of the day, I believe it's harming the patients. The patients are
Yes.
receiving the negative side effects from it. And I mean, you talk a lot about parents and families are more important than therapists. Is this why you believe that?
For sure. I do believe there is a place for therapists. I just
Mhm.
think the place of therapists has become very much overblown in our current culture, and I think we need to scale it back and use more discretion when it comes to when we go to a professional, and just when we even approach one, and then when we do, that we also use our own judgment and we don't take things for face value, and we don't just go along with what they say. Because of course, what's happening, or what has happened, we've heard, you and I know a lot of these families in common. How did they get caught up in it? They were in a very vulnerable place. They didn't trust themselves for good reason, because they were going through something really difficult in their lives. Their family was in crisis for one reason or another, or their
Mhm.
child was in crisis for one reason or another. They needed help. They wanted help, and they trusted who they thought was supposed to be helping them. And those people told them if they didn't go along with this, their child will kill themselves. And they hadn't heard an alternate message yet. Now, because thanks to you, thanks to me, thanks to so many more people who have spoken out against this, that message is finally getting out there. But a lot of people aren't hearing it because it's still not in the mainstream media.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
I do believe, like you said, over the last year, 2 years, a lot of parents are recognizing and waking up that, okay, we gotta look at all the options and really have some discernment here with how we move forward. I mean, we hear Chloe Cole share all the
Mhm.
time. My parents were told by the doctors, do you want a dead daughter or an alive son? And that is why they kind of went with her to
Mhm.
move on, transitioning her body or trying to transition her body because we all know you can't
Right.
successfully. And then luckily detransitioning and just watching her turn into just an amazing and beautiful woman. And so, yeah, these are the lies parents are being told. And I think you wrote a really great book that kind of applies directly to this, a good book to read with your young daughters, young children. So it has just like an underlying message on this. It kind of gets conversations flowing and going, and it's called Froggy Girl. And I have mine right,
Yay.
and it
I
is
have mine too.
yes, there we go. I mean, for all of those that are watching and not just tuning in, the artwork in this book is just beyond incredible, and we will dive into all of
And
that.
it's a detransitioner who did the artwork
Yes,
too. His name is
amazing.
Nicholas Blooms, and he
Um,
did a great, great job. I
yeah.
was blown away by his art. And like this one, I'm holding up for people who can see. Like this is a page where she's feeling sad and alone, and you can see they made her, like, Nick made her kind of small when the frogs were all big. And I don't know, he just really conveyed the feelings, and then the colors are so beautiful and vibrant, which we worked on together for the concepts.
Yes. No, it is a book where you could sit there and read it with your kids, and they are going to thoroughly enjoy the artwork and all the colors, and like could sit and look at each page for 5 minutes just like picking out all the fun different things.
There's lots of
But
little details, little tadpoles and things like that. Yeah.
yes. So fun. But I love on the back, it says Froggy Girl is a story about a little girl who wishes to be a frog, but learns that the most important thing she can do is be herself. And so, Pamela, what inspired you to write Froggy Girl?
So it's an interesting story because, I have the other book that I wrote, the parents' guide. It's called A Practical Response to Gender Distress. And I was, as a new author, I was all excited. I was stalking it on Amazon. So I was watching it on all the lists. They have these lists where,
Mhm.
where you're in. So it was ranking pretty high in the teen LGBTQ section of Amazon. And so mine was the only kind of pro reality book on that list. It was next to all these really nasty, disgusting books that I couldn't believe was next to mine. It was weird. It was surreal to see it next to all these like
Mhm.
big trans influencers books and things like that. And so and then I started to look and see just how many children's books there were that encourage kids to reject their bodies, reject reality, reject themselves. And I was like, we need to do more of that. We need to make more of these books. So I was like, well, that will be me. I will do that. And I remember I woke up one night at like 3 in the morning with these rhymes going through my head. And that's how it got started. I was like, there once was a girl who said she was a frog, not a chicken, cow, cat, or dog. Oh, and then I like wrote it down. She knew how to hop, so it had to be true. Being a frog seemed right. what else could she do? So I just like the little rhyme just came to my head, and then we refined them, and the publisher actually helped me get a few words here and there. But that's how it came to, came together, was just that watching all the madness and thinking I wanted to contribute and have a tool for parents to be able to be proactive, not just reactive, to help them learn that they can't pretend to be something that they're not. And it's kind of just a classical tale. It can be compared to like the Ugly Duckling, or some of these other very classic tales out there. Yeah, that's where it came. And then and Nick and I connected because we were at an AAP conference together. I don't know if you know the story. Do you know we went to this AAP conference together, and they bought us a table. We were there to speak to doctors, and we shared, what the detransitioners shared a lot of their stories. Chloe Cole was there too, actually. But on the third day, we were kicked out. And it was this huge thing where we were kicked out. It went super viral on Twitter because Matt Walsh retweeted the story from Daily Wire. And so, we bonded on that whole thing. And so after that, we connected, and he became my artist for this book, which is pretty neat.
Yes. No, I love everything about this. And so if you are a parent that's listening right now and you're trying to figure out, how do I when is it too early to have these conversations with my child? When is it too soon? It is honestly never soon enough. If they are in public school, they are getting it as early as kindergarten. I mean, we are watching currently a
Yes.
lawsuit play out in San Diego over the book My Shadow is Blue, or it's something like that. But parents, what it's telling students is it
Yeah.
is a book where it is, you can be a girl, but your shadow might be blue, or you're a boy and your shadow might be pink, or your shadow could be purple. Ultimately saying like you can choose your identity and that can change and everything. And so I just think, yeah, you don't want to sit down with your 5-year-old and tell your 5-year-old, hey, there are kids that are thinking they can transition their bodies and they're getting mastectomies and this is that and this is how we do it. No, you want to figure out how to talk about things in an age appropriate way. And this book does that. I mean, the whole book, she's trying so hard to be this frog. And then she, like you said, she's realizing she's sad and feeling alone because she can't be a frog. And at the end of the day, like, she figured out, like, I love the ending. The little girl learned to love the way God made her, beautiful and smart and full of favor. Like, it is just so, I love it. It is so good to read to any child. I mean, what a message when they are getting the opposite. I mean, I get calls from families that are confused why their students in preschool are getting opposite
It's
messages in sequence.
insane, right?
Yeah,
It's insane.
it is
Like,
insane.
if you had talked to me even 5 years ago, I would say, "Don't mention this to little kids. They don't need to know about this stuff." However, we're not living in that world anymore. We're living in a world where they are being indoctrinated in school, like you said, that's the main area, but just everywhere. You go get a cup of coffee, and then there's the flag right there, and they welcome everyone, and it seems innocuous, but what does that really mean? That means that we're okay with telling kids they can chop their body parts off, right? I mean, this is everywhere. And you've got a little kid asking, what does that mean? And what does that mean? And so you want to be able to have this conversation with them, like you said, in a more child appropriate way. And my book does not mention gender at all. There's nothing in there. In fact, at the end, there's a little bio of Nick and I, and he wrote his little description. He wrote something about being a detransitioner, and I told him to take that out. So I didn't want that word in there. I don't want kids to even ask or know what that means, because I just want them to have the broad concept that they should accept reality, accept themselves for who they are, because when they try to be something they're not, it doesn't work well, and you end up feeling more sad, you feeling more isolated. And that's what my book is about.
Yes, I love it. It shares the truth while keeping the innocence of children. I mean,
That's it.
children are
Yes.
innocent, and I like, you just nailed it perfectly on how to
You
do
could
that.
even use it with teenagers too.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously they're older, but you can a teenager could pick this up and read it and be like, "Oh," and it might kind of turn some dials for them too.
Yes.
So,
I mean, even going through it myself, I'm like, God made me like exactly as he designed, like in his perfect image.
yes.
I can do this and here's what I can do. And God, like, it's just such a great reminder too, in a society that's constantly telling you to go find your identity, go figure out who you are. I mean, like I said, I'm 25 and I'm like, Yeah, God made me beautifully in his image, like, yes.
And it's speaking to
So
the adults too that, a lot of children's books, they're for children, but if you think about it, they're kind of speaking to the parents
Mhm,
too. And the books on their side are doing that. Not just indoctrinating the children, but they're indoctrinating the parents. So that it is called
mhm,
My Shadow is Pink, that Shadow
mhm.
Pink book, that's indoctrinating everyone involved. And they're teaching them they can be whatever they feel, and it's not, nothing is grounded in reality. That's a terrible message, and it's a recipe for disaster. So yeah, my book is, I put a counter message out there, and it's for both the adults and for the children.
Of that. And, even though we already shared about books that are sending the opposing message to children and what's happening in schools, what's happening in the mental health world, people still might be thinking, is this something we really need to be making sure we're talking about with our families? And, we both listened to Supreme Court oral arguments this past
Yes.
January. And it was all about the girls' sports issue. It was focusing on whether states have the right or not to protect girls' sports. And, Pamela, you wrote a couple op eds on this. I think anyone that has any common sense was losing their mind listening to some of these oral arguments. And, one of the main things about it was we were having attorneys and Supreme Court justices that can't tell you what a woman is, that can't define sex. And so, Pamela, when you were listening to these oral arguments, what was going through your mind?
Oh my gosh. I was losing my mind is what was happening. I was actually so mad at myself for agreeing to write this article on those sessions, because I thought I was going to write some triumphant article about how great the Supreme Court was because they could name what a woman was, and that we were now going to, everybody knows that boys have an advantage in sports, and in all these very common sense things that I think anybody who has an honest, his being honest knows. However, that was not how the arguments went on all sides, including some conservative justices. They were using all the jargon. They couldn't name what a woman was. And I got to tell you, I was so jealous of you. You were out there on the steps, all of you guys who were out there, having these great speeches, surrounded by people who had common sense. I was so jealous. I was like, "Oh, I'm home listening to this mumbo jumbo garbage and trying to make sense of all this legalese, all this legal gymnastics that they were doing." I could not believe it. I can't even remember it because it was so insane. And I ended up just writing about how it was, the title of that op-ed is the best title, and I did not write it. My editor, Libby Evans, wrote it. I think it was, that the Supreme Court needs to stop around and say what a woman is. It was like the best headline ever. But
Yeah.
yeah, what was going through my head was, yeah, we have a long way to go is actually really what was going through my head. And I was very disappointed.
And something you dove into a little bit in this op ed, and I was kind of feeling the same way, was the manipulation of language. Like we were
Hmm.
hearing Supreme Court justices, the attorneys inside the court use terms like assigned at birth or cisgender, cis, and all these different things. Why is it so important we don't cave to this language, and why we shouldn't allow language to be manipulated like this?
Well, that hearing was a clear example because it was really confusing. I think anybody who was trying to follow that really couldn't follow. Who or what are we talking about? Are we talking about a boy? Are we talking about a girl? And in that case, it mattered. It matters. We need to know if we're talking about a boy in the sports team or a girl in the sports team. It was so confusing when they were talking. What we didn't know what was going on. And so we need to know those things, especially when it comes to a legal standing, when it comes to safety. We can't just pretend we can just say whatever we want and act like it doesn't have any kind of consequences. It has huge consequences, and that Supreme Court hearing was quite the example.
And so, again, parents that are listening right now, this is why you need to be reading the book Froggy Girl and Pamela's other book, because even Supreme Court justices who are supposed to be like the smartest people ever can't get this right. And that's why we have to be talking about this and having conversations. And Pamela, from your perspective as a therapist, why is clarity about biological sex important for society and kids?
Well, if you think about it, one of the reasons a lot of people feel anxious is when you can't figure out what's going on, when there's a lot of chaos in the world. And when you're changing language and you're changing reality and your friends are changing their pronouns every second and even adults are, pushing all this stuff everywhere, that creates a lot of anxiety for everyone involved, especially children, but pretty much everyone involved. So it's super important that we have actual rules and boundaries and truth and reality, because that will help us all stay sane. That will help us all be calm and grounded and, you know, it's just like normal. We need normal. We need it. It's actually important. And we know the goal of queer theory is to turn everything normal upside down, anti-normal. And we need to fight for normalcy. It's important.
Absolutely. And this is something you talk a little bit about in your other book, A Practical Response to Gender Distress. And this is the book that you were mentioning was up there with some of the crazy trans books. And then we have this on the side. And so through this book, I mean, what are you seeing parents experience right now with this whole
Mm.
gender distress?
Yeah, I mean, they're still struggling. There's still a lot of parents that are struggling. I do consultations now, like a couple a week. Like I'll be meeting another one tomorrow, and one of the themes is autism. So a lot of these kids who have autism or have autistic traits, they get caught up in this, and it's really hard to pull them out of it because they have such rigid thinking and they don't have a really good social group to land, if you take them out of their little, trans world. And also the internet becomes much more important to people who are autistic because, it's harder to socialize in real life. So that's been one of the biggest struggles is kids that have that struggle and getting caught up in it. But I noticed too, the parents that have stayed strong and they stay consistent and they believe in themselves, that goes a really long way for the kids. Because another theme is the parents or the families that get caught up in this are the families that maybe are a little insecure in their parenting, maybe are afraid to put rules. They're afraid their kid's going to act out if they say no more phone or if they say no more something. Just set ground rules, or they say they're afraid they're going to upset their child. That's one of the themes too. There's so many different types of families or, types of presentations, but that's a theme. So once a parent has more confidence, then they're setting the tone. They're a leader, because really what this is in a lot of cases, it's a child who is acting out in like a new way where it used to be like rebellious in one way, but they're now parent hasn't taken charge. So now they're kind of taking charge in the family in this kind of unhealthy way. And so if you have the adults behaving like adults and being leaders and standing up to what they know is right, and they do what they believe and they believe in themselves, even if their teenager says, I hate you, eventually they usually come around and it's okay. Does that make
Absolutely.
sense? Yeah.
Yes. And I think like this book, A Practical Response to Gender Distress, people should be reading it before they're necessarily in that situation because you never know when it can happen to your family. You never know when it can happen to your sibling. You never know when it can happen to your child. You don't know. And you try to raise your child up well. You try to train them in the truth, but you never know what can catch them, especially
It
Pamela.
happens to lots of people. It happens
Mhm.
to lots of good families. I see that a lot online. People say, "Oh, well, the parents just are terrible, and that's why it would never happen to me." We're, very church going, all, a wholesome family that just wouldn't happen to us. But it happens to all kinds of families. And there's good. These indoctrinators, these cult like leaders that put all these messages in your insecure child, they're effective. So you need to be aware.
And what is something you think, or what have you heard families or parents or even teenagers take away, their takeaway from a practical response to gender distress?
Well, those that agree with us, I get a lot of praise for my book because it just spills everything out. People always they know something's wrong. Most people know something's wrong. They know that things aren't right, but they don't really have the words for it. It's easy to get kind of caught like a deer in headlights when you've got someone who's versed in their side with all their lies. They say it real quick, real confidently, and then you're like, "Wait, what?" Like the studies about the suicide thing. People start to question, "Oh, maybe, I don't want anyone to kill themselves. Of course, I'm a good person." So then you start to question that. So I breaks down all these different lies. The other one is that there's only 1% of detransitioners detransitioners, that only 1% detransition. First of all, if that's really true, that's too much anyway.
Mhm.
But that is a complete falsehood. We'd have no idea. There's no way we can track detransitioners because they don't go back to their doctors. There's no code. I know you know this. Probably most of your audience knows this. But people who are introduced to this, they hear that and they're like, well, okay, all right, well, maybe it's not that bad. And then they realize, oh, actually, the whole thing is just completely false. So that's another thing. So I break down all these lies. I have a section, I think that's unique in my book, that's not anyone else's book, about the harms of pronouns and social transition. Because I think people do recognize the harms of the medicalization. And I do talk about that in my book too. I didn't actually realize before how bad the medicalization was, but most normal, common sense person would know that any kind of medicalization has some harms, but they might not realize that pronouns might have harms. What's the harm of a little pronoun? It's just whatever, but actually they have huge harm. So I go into that. And then I have very also just direct ways you can fight against it, ways you can teach your kid to stand up to it, actual phrases like, I don't want to do this, like I actually like spell it out for you, because people, I think they get caught like a deer in headlights. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to fight back. And they're like, I know this is wrong, but they kind of shrivel because it's so intimidating. So my book is very much, it's about empowering people to stand up to it and have the words for it. I have a trans English dictionary in the back. So there's all kinds of, I translate all of their nonsense, like what is cis, and that's really just a way of making something normal be abnormal so that we can turn the world upside down. Yeah, not good. I break it down. Gender affirming care, not care. They call it that, but that's a euphemism. For people who have been in this, most of them will be looking at it and be nodding and be like, yeah, but the people that have not spent as much time as like you and I have on this topic, it's great for those people to just have all of the lies, all of the narratives just completely debunked. And then it
Mhm.
also has very practical, as in the title, practical things on what to do, what to say, how to find a therapist that's not going to affirm your child, how to get your kid out of it, just the things you should be looking out for. So it's got all of that in there and it's pretty concise. It doesn't have a lot of fluffy language in it. Oh, and it also has pictures. What's really great about it is the detransitioners gave me permission to use their artwork in it. And there's some really powerful artwork. Like Chloe, let me see if I could find it real quick. Chloe did this beautiful drawing of when she felt like her womanhood was like attacked or, taken from her. I don't know if she still feels that way because she's obviously done a lot of healing, but at the time she drew that, here it is. It was
Oh,
so
yes.
good. So good. And this was actually, she drew this, it was actually in color. So these bits were red. So it's a little more graphic and, when it's in color. So I'll just read the caption. 19-year-old artist, this is when she was 19. She's 21 now, I believe.
Mhm.
19-year-old artist Chloe Cole started puberty blockers and testosterone at 13 and had a double mastectomy at age 15. In her words, I find it incredibly difficult to convey through words how lost or violated I really feel. I can say visceral things like I lost my womanhood before I had it over and over again, but I don't think a sentence can capture anything quite like art does. So this book, it really helps people understand what is really going on, because there's so many times where people, they just think it's nice. They don't understand, and they need to see this kind of stuff. They need to read those words from a real human being who's been harmed by this to understand what this is really about and to really understand the dark side of it and understand how to fight back against it. So that's what
Yeah.
this book has.
And for anyone that's listening right now that's like, well, no one directly in my life is struggling with this, so I don't need this book. I would recommend, why not be ahead of the game? Why not be prepared? Also, if your child is not directly struggling with this, there are kids at their school that are, and your child is going to have questions and they're going to ask things. I spent a couple weeks ago an hour or two with some junior hires that were asking me questions on these topics because they're watching this play out on their campuses, and you should be equipped as a parent on how to respond to your child when they're confused, when they're asking, should I use pronouns or should I not? Because as Pamela said, it is extremely harmful. We should not be using pronouns. We shouldn't be buying into the ideology and using their language. And so I would recommend for all of you to get both of these books, Froggy Girl and A Practical Response to Gender Distress. We will have linked in the show notes links to where you can buy the book. So check it out there. Pamela, something that I always go back to with, especially with Christians, is Genesis 1:27. God made us male and female. There's no, and if you want to be this or if you want to change that, he made us male and female. It is so clear. It's one of the reasons I believe we shouldn't be using pronouns, because who are we to think we're more loving or having a better approach than God himself? But
Mhm.
something you have touched on is and been open about is the importance of faith in children's mental health. And so why do you believe that plays an important role in it?
Faith plays such an amazing, like, such an important role in mental health. And ironically, when I was coming up the ranks in the 90s, I was taught that. It was not shied away from at that time. But over time now, faith has been completely overtaken by the left, and their faith is this weird gender ideology. It's taken over. So they believe this weird religion that somehow we have these gender souls or something, right? That's their religion,
Mhm.
completely unhealthy. And so we know what that leads to. That leads to, chopped up bodies and really destroyed mental health. It's just so important. If we don't listen to, what how we were made from God's perspective, then what are we, right? Like, we need that. I think I people use God. People need God to gain their strength, to get their if you don't have that, I just feel like you're lost. And
Mhm.
it's what grounds us. And yeah, so that is also why I put that last line in my book. The
Yeah.
where the little girl learned to love the way God made her, beautiful and smart and full of fervor. So yeah, that's it all comes back to that, right? If that gives us our framework to
Mhm.
that's what we need. We need the Bible. We need that for our framework. And if we don't have it, then we're just lost and we turn into anxious and depressed, lonely people.
Yes. No, it's we have the truth, we have the framework. Why would we not dive into that? Why would we not use that to our advantage that the truth is given to us? And I know there's teenage girls listening, there's college girls listening, but I like I mentioned a couple of times, there's a lot of moms and grandmas that are listening. And so I guess just some advice to parents, Pamela, if a parent is listening right now and is feeling overwhelmed or confused just with all the different attacks their child might be under with this gender identity thing, what's something you would want them to know?
Well, I think it goes with our conversation. I mean, reach for God and believe in yourself and believe in God, and I think that will send you in the right direction. I think what has harmed people is that they no longer believe in themselves and they don't believe in God, and they get lost. And then they fall into the arms of the prey, and they believe these quote unquote experts that has sent them awry. But if you listen to for me, I would just describe it as your gut, right? Like, God is telling you something when you have that gut instinct. You should listen to that. So believe in yourself is really what I'd like people to know.
And I don't want anyone leaving this episode and being like, man, like the world's just such a mess. Everything's downhill from here. Because I know I have found so much hope in different things, especially the past year or so on this movement and this issue. But what is something, Pamela, that gives you hope about this generation?
Oh, this generation. Well, first of all, I think that a lot of young people are rebelling against this whole thing. We've have these quote unquote experts that are the dumb ones, and then you've got the kids that are actually speaking up against the adults. I mean, I've seen that a lot. I've seen you with these young women who are speaking up in the sports arena, and that gives me so much hope. There are so many wins that our movement is having, and I don't think this is all going to last. But it does require people to continue to have more bravery and more strength, to not cower to the big activists that are trying to silence us. But I mean, this is not going to last. I think this is going to change, and I think young people are getting it. I think young people they don't want to be stuck on their phones all the time. They're craving real life. They're reaching more to church, and yeah, I mean, I think they're finding themselves. They're realizing that they don't want to go in the same direction we've been going in, and they're gonna make it a good change.
Yes, yeah, it has been fun to watch, like, especially the high schoolers. The high schoolers are like, "No,
Yeah.
no, we're done with this." Like, the boys are pulling the tampon machines out of the boys'
Oh, I
restroom.
love that.
It's been so fun. It's like, yes, like, say no to the insanity that's being pushed on you. But Pamela, before we wrap up, is there any final words or anything you would like to share with the listeners?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I just say trust your instincts, Trust yourself. Don't just follow along. If you think something's wrong, feel free to question it. And including me, including, all of us. Like I think the more people that can think for themselves for real, the better our world is.
Absolutely. And what is the best way people can keep up with what you're doing or find out more about you?
So I have my Instagram is at the truthful therapist. I just changed my Twitter to my name, which is P Garfield Jaeger with a J. And my website is thetruthfultherapist.org. And on those socials, you can find link trees. So you can find all my articles and all kinds of media appearances I've made and lots of projects that I'm working on and books I've written and all that fun stuff.
Amazing. So, for all you listeners, check out the show notes. We'll have the social media, the website, all of that linked below. We will have links to go get the books. Do not forget to go get those books, start reading them, and just equip yourself in truth. But, Pamela, thank you so much for being on today. And just thank you for all you're doing to just help make California and this nation a better place and a place that's moving towards sanity and truth. So, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.